Welcome to Talent X,
the Talent Experience podcast featuring authentic conversations on the future of work.
empowering you to better understand and deliver a best-in-class, future-proofed career experience.
For more insightful conversations, visit talentxpodcast.com.
We hope you enjoy this episode of the Talent X podcast.
Hello, I'm John Hollon, and welcome to the Talent X podcast, the Talent Experience podcast. Today's guest is my friend Jeanne Meister. Jeanne is the founding partner of Future Workplace, an HR advisory and membership firm dedicated to educating HR leaders on what's next in preparing for the future workforce and workplace. Thanks for joining us, Jeanne. Can you take a moment and tell us a little bit about yourself and your company?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me, John. We go back many years. It's a pleasure to work with you again. And thank you to Fuel 50. Yes, what's new with Future Workplace? We are an HR advisory and membership firm. We have launched just in the last couple of months, the Future Workplace Academy, a curated collection of online courses to upskill HR and their teams on the future of work, issues like using AI for HR, people analytics, the transformation of learning, and employee experience. So we, I guess, thank goodness, we have a whole range of digital offerings in this very unusual time that we're brought together for this podcast.
That sounds great. It sounds like you're very busy.
Yeah, we are.
Well, that's like a good thing. One of the things that sort of dominates everything we're talking about these days is what's going on with the workplace everywhere and the coronavirus and all of that. Why don't you start by talking a little bit about what you see as the big takeaways, of course, so far, on how the pandemic and resulting business shutdown will impact and affect the future of work?
Well, I think there are three big takeaways. And the major one is the coronavirus has really become the great accelerator for the big transformation of our lifetime, actually. You know, right now, how we work, how we learn, how we communicate is really impacted by the coronavirus. I'm thinking of the term I used to use in many presentations starting maybe 6 or 7 years ago, called VUCA. Do you remember? Volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous.
I do.
Yeah, that was actually a term that was coined in 1987 by the Army War College. And I think we are all living it today. It's no longer a bullet point on our slides. It's how we get up and work every day. So let me talk to you about three things. We did a survey at Future Workplace of 350 HR leaders, and that was the name of the survey, the impact of the coronavirus on the workplace. So the first one is obviously ramping up training and investment in remote working. Gartner estimates that 90% of all workers that can work remotely are now either mandated or encouraged to work remotely. So what companies haven't done in many cases is have a policy that they've really communicated on this, and importantly, trained individual workers on how to be successful as a remote worker and their managers. So I had the opportunity to speak with a lead on this area at Microsoft, and Microsoft has actually created a guide for working from home, and really this training really focuses on how to set up your physical and your virtual workspace. How to encourage workers to over communicate with each other, and I think importantly how to recognize that it's just a new way of working, and we're going to have to give everyone a lot more support in this. So that's one, remote working. The second one is worker well-being. I think this is so important, as many of us now that we're working remotely, are sitting on one Zoom call after another where you sort of have to sit, right? And I think the future of work is slowly becoming the future of worker well-being. And we have to really, as leaders, understand the anxiety that's out there in the workplace among our team members and talk about it and really help them with honing in their physical, their mental, and their emotional well-being. So the third one is, I think for some companies, they're seeing an opportunity here. If they haven't already built out a digital set of offerings, they have to now in order to survive. So those are my top three, John.
So it sounds like, this really is going to be a breakthrough event, and maybe the big moment for the remote workforce. Do you think this is the final push we need to really get organizations that had resisted doing this, because a lot had, get them on board and actually make them willing to make it a regular option for their employees?
Absolutely. I think remote work has happened with a very small percentage of the workforce. And I think that now people will find, guess what? I can be not only as productive, but maybe even more productive. And I think companies are going to question, should this job be in an office setting or should it be a remote worker job? I think many job families and roles will be really critically looked at, because there is a cost savings. And if you do it right, you know, it's not that you're never get together with your teams, but you can closely craft when you want to have physical face-to-face meetings.
It's funny. One of those publications that I work for, that I dealt with you in the past, I had a boss, I had a publisher who very much was all about having the FaceTime. And even though there were many times it would make more sense for us to work from home, he just would not have it. You had to have the FaceTime. And so it's great to see that finally going away, because what goes away with that is the notion that somehow you are goofing off or sitting at home in your jammies and your slippers. And my experience with remote work, but you actually work harder because you never leave work. You're at work all the time because you can be at work all the time.
Absolutely. I think the biggest issue is how to deal with employee burnout. And that's why the focus should be on worker well-being. I think we were starting to see some companies, I'm a Forbes contributor and wrote an article about what PwC is doing, and they're being very prescriptive on giving folks habits to improve their physical and emotional well-being. But we're going to see a lot more attention. I know that the companies that now are working remotely for the first time are starting to curate articles and courses on worker well-being. So I think you're going to have to see that, because we have to give people guidance on how to do this in a smart way.
Well, I love the fact that you've been doing research and are so plugged in to what companies are doing right now in this moment of incredible change. But have you seen any workforce management decisions that have surprised you? Is there anything that you thought that would happen that maybe didn't?
Well, I'm surprised at how many companies and their HR leaders say, actually, they didn't feel as prepared as they should for this pandemic. And I think that, many companies still lack an individual in the role of a business continuity manager, right? And this is somebody that really enables employees to continue working without endangering them. And I think that companies are saying that, that's a role that maybe was put on the back burner, or they hadn't focused on it, or they hadn't developed that person enough. So that's a surprise, right? I think I'm pleasantly surprised by companies that are making both global and local responses to the pandemic. Global responses on adjusting sick pay and carryover vacation, and local responses looking at where their employees are around the world and launching crisis response teams to help them. And then when I did this survey, we were alerted to a number of companies that are forming remote worker employee resource groups, right? I mean, companies have had this in HR for decades for leadership or women leaders. And now they're saying, you know what, even whenever we go back to work, we should really nurture this group of remote workers.
Well, and it sounds like you're seeing a lot of really substantial and long-lasting changes in the long-term people strategy for a lot of organizations.
Yeah, I am. I think that what I've started to see is especially with individuals that hold the title of global talent acquisition leaders, right? Because now their world has changed on a dime. It wasn't too long ago that everyone was talking about the war for talent. And now, right? And now what they're talking about is how do they really focus on what will remain the critical jobs, and what's our pipeline for that? And, should these, and what about the rest of those jobs? And should they be done in a physical workplace or remote working? I think I'm also seeing a lot of focus on what happens when we all go back to work. What's the recovery plan? And there's only a few very forward-looking HR leaders that are working with their teams on what's the new normal? Will we ever shake hands again, John, in the office? Right? I mean, every time I saw you at one of the meetings we would attend together, we probably not only shook hands, but we hugged. Well, when will that ever happen again?
Right. Yes, now I think people are doing the little foot thing and the elbows and, all of that. Well, it sounds like, that whole notion of what do we do after this? How do we recover is a really, really interesting one. What kind of advice do you have when you talk to companies and organizations and they start talking about these things? What would you say to them about what they need to be doing to get through this and beyond?
Well, I think they have to have a recovery plan before everyone goes back to work. I think that they can't start talking about it when they go back. They have to have it in place and communicate it and have a town hall on things like what are the new social norms when we do in fact get together? How do we begin to critically examine which jobs should remain remote, right? I think that companies are really going to reevaluate just about everything, and they should, right? Including in HR, what were some of the assumptions that we have held dear? Does PTO still make sense, right? Or is it, if you're, does it make sense if you're a remote worker? Do you have PTO? Is that important? Or you're just going to do your job and you're going to be reviewed on your deliverables? And as you said, it's not FaceTime, it's your contribution. So is that just an outdated HR policy?
Well, it sounds like maybe, if you could put it this way, the silver lining about this crisis is that it's going to really finally force companies to really look hard and long at what they're doing and what they need to be doing. And if they had any reservations about making changes in the past, they got to get past that.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I think that everyone should take a look at what are they going to do more, the old, what are you going to do more of? What are you going to do less of? And what are you going to stop doing? Well, that very simple exercise is more important now than ever. And I think they're going to be surprised at what are they going to stop doing.
Right. Yeah, that's always tough to try to get those things figured out. You write and speak a lot about the future of work. How has this crisis changed your thinking about the future of work and where work is going?
Well, it's no longer preparing for the future of work. We are here. We have arrived. So that's number one. Number two, often, you would talk about the future of work to HR audiences, and now everybody, it's on the top of everybody's agenda because they are all going through massive disruption, change, and transformation. So I think the initiatives that some companies started to talk about as isolated experiments are now going to just surge ahead. Things like what we just talked about, remote working policies. But I also think using artificial intelligence in the workplace. I think as companies do execute some type of cuts in the workforce, they're going to take another hard look at how do they leverage artificial intelligence for routine tasks that had been handled by humans, and say, okay, that future that we were looking at where humans are working side by side with bots is here today. It's here next month. And now we're going to really build an execution plan for an enterprise-wide rollout of this. So it's no longer the future, it's on my agenda for the next 90 days.
I'm struck by this notion that I think what really caught a lot of companies and a lot of people off guard was that this was something that nobody ever imagined could happen, which is to say, we're going to shut down the economy, not just of the United States, but of the world, but basically of, the first world. We are going to shut everything down. And it's scary, but who would have thought that? So I think there's going to be much more thinking about the, what ifs, thinking about the things that you never would imagine in the past, because something completely unimaginable has actually come to pass.
Yeah, and it reminds me, I've written a number of books, and the last book is The Future Workplace Experience, and we have a chapter on expect the unexpected, right? And right, for every one of our 10 rules for mastering, it's such a great subtitle in this world. It's the 10 rules for mastering disruption in engaging employees. And for each rule, we state the rule, and then we say, well, expect the unexpected. So we're just going to have to live. That's going to be the new normal. I think what we're operating in today is the normal. It may not be the new normal.
Right. Right. Well, I would love to go on chatting. We could talk all day about this stuff, but we're going to have to wrap up. But we always have one question we like to ask all the guests at the end, because here at the Talent X podcast, we wholeheartedly believe that everyone should have a job they love and one that they're really passionate about. So, Jeanne, what do you love about the work and the job that you do?
I love that everything I write is so current today. The world events keeps me up to date, and I'm always making the translation for how is this impacting my clients, who are chief human resource officers, chief talent officers, and chief learning officers. So I keep current by writing for Forbes and HBR and everything in the news about any artificial intelligence or gig workers, or the importance of upskilling, are all the topics that are important to me and my clients. And I'm loving my job every day and continue.
And I love the fact that, no matter when I ask you something or where it is, you always have an answer, and you're on the cutting edge of things, which is even more important now in this current environment. So I just want to say thank you, Jeanne, for spending time with us today on Talent X, the Talent Experience podcast, Be good, be safe, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Talent X podcast.
For more talent experience and future of work conversations, visit talentxpodcast.com.
Follow us on Twitter at TalentXPodcast.
Or join the conversation with #TalentXPodcast on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, or Twitter.
Talent X, the Talent Experience podcast, was brought to you by the fabulous Fuelies at Fuel 50.